So today I wanted to talk about some new rules that came out. So I'm a member of the Missouri Trappers Association, and every year we have really two big meetings. One is the spring meeting that is basically for the board members and for the general membership to come in and vote on things. Most of it has to do with the organization itself, how they're going to spend money, what they're going to, promote or programs they're going to do. We do, some youth trapper education, things like that. And then we have a fall rendezvous every year as well. And I think the board members meet there. I don't think it's a general, membership meeting at that one. But we have vendors come in, and you can buy trapping supplies and talk to the lure makers, and it's pretty cool. And we get some pretty big name lure makers to come to it every year, which is pretty neat. So those are the two big meetings. In the spring meeting, we talked about, so we have a group, a small committee of the board members who talk to, or I guess they propose changes to rules and regulations to the Missouri Department of Conservation. And I'm sure that every state trapping organization has something like this. And your state may call it the Fish and Wildlife or whatever. In Missouri, we call it the Department of Conservation, but it's the the folks that make the regulations as far as trapping limits and seasons and all those type things. So during that spring meeting, we voted on some changes. What we thought should be changed, what we think it should be changed to. We all voted on that, and our committee, kind of formalized that and took that to the Department of Conservation. And they did make some of the changes, which is good. One of the things that we talked about changing, and this is just one of the things. So here in Missouri, we have a 24-hour check law, and 24-hour check law on everything except killing type traps that are set underwater. So that's how the law read up until now. So killing type traps that are set underwater, which basically are going to be colony traps and conibears, right? So if you had a colony trap or a conibear trap set underwater, you could check it every 48 hours. So it was a 48-hour check law on killing type traps set underwater, and a 24-hour check law on everything else. And as trappers, we all kind of voted to extend that 48-hour check law, not just to killing type traps, but to killing type sets, which would be drowning sets. So this is the new regulation, and I'm gonna read this part because there's some confusion, I think, right now about what this means. So there's a new part here. It says new wildlife must be removed or released from traps daily except for colony and killing type traps set underwater. Now that's all the same. Or drowning sets, which must be checked every 48 hours. Okay? So everything was the same in that sentence as it always has been, or it has been as long as I've been reading this regulation, except for the or drowning sets. So then down here they had to define what a drowning set means, and the definition of drowning set is must be constructed of a solid fiber or steel rod that is anchored at each end, have a drowning lock attached to the trap or snare that allows it to slide only one way, and be set in water at a depth sufficient for drowning. So that's really not what we proposed, I guess, but I can understand why it's written this way, and I think this is kind of there's a bit of a debate right now in a couple of the forums and stuff that deal specifically with Missouri trappers about why the law was written the way that it is. So basically, by their definition of drowning sets, the only thing that changed is you can use drowning rods to make a drowning set, and that would be legal to check every 48 hours. Everything else, the drowning rods or the drowning sets that I made and showed you on the last two videos, both the beaver catches, those were not made with drowning rods. Those were made with drowning slide cables and a sack full of rocks basically was my weight, right? So first, let me explain why I can understand why it was written this way. So if you are on the other side of the table and it's your responsibility to enforce these laws, I can see why you would want it written this way. A drowning rod, again, is just like they said. I'm sure everybody, if you're subscribed to this channel, you probably know what a drowning rod is. But basically, it's a rod. It's either a piece of rebar or smooth steel rod or a fiberglass, like a fence pole. And basically, you would put some sort of device on one end that would keep the drowner lock from coming off the bottom. You would jam that bottom into the mud bank, at an angle, and then in deeper water, and then you would pin the top of it down with a T-bar stake or wire it to something so that both ends were solidly attached, and that drowner lock, that slide, is only going to allow that trap to go down the rod and not come back. So with that method of drowning, it's pretty straightforward. They've told you what you have to have, and really the biggest thing that eliminates is weight. So if you were to write into the law that you can use a cable and a weight, well, then you kind of have to talk about the weight as far as how much weight. And the bottom of this, the very last piece of criteria on this is be set in water that at a depth sufficient for drowning. So that's already pretty subjective, right? That's not real super well defined. And I think that's going to be a little bit tough to enforce, honestly, because if you think about the difference between drowning a mink and drowning an otter, that's a big difference. An otter's 4 feet long, and a mink is not even a foot, in some cases. So if you were to catch an otter by the back foot in a mink set, and the set would have worked perfectly for a mink, but obviously the otter's not going to be drowned probably in the same set. So that makes things a little bit open to interpretation, which I'm not sure how they're going to handle that. I've already heard some people say that they talked to their agent about it, and the agent said basically anything that could be caught in that trap and that set would have to be able to be drowned by that set. And pretty much around here that means otters, because pretty much anywhere you make a set where you would catch a mink or a raccoon or a beaver, all of those type sets are going to be theoretically possible that you would catch an otter in that set. So you're looking at 5 feet of water, right? Because you think 48 inches, the otter, a back foot catch, and then you've got the trap chain. That's a pretty deep water hole you're going to have to find. Now, that being said, for guys that use drowning rods and are using them in really deep water, this is a good thing, because they're going to be able to run more traps. They're going to be able to check less frequently, and I think it's going to make some guys happy. For me, drowning rods don't really make a lot of sense. I'm usually running around on a four-wheeler. Drowning rods are 8 to 15 feet long, so they're pretty big. If you're using steel, they're pretty heavy. And the biggest problem with drowning rods for me is where I trap, it's a gravel or rock bottom. I mean, I just don't have that soft mud that I can jam that drowning rod down into like some guys do. So it doesn't really help me because I can't use this method anyway. But for the guys that it can help, they're getting the benefit. So, that's a little bit subjective though, how deep the water has to be, because the sets that I made that you saw, I mean, I'm probably in 3.5 or 4 feet of water. It's not that deep, and they work perfectly, as you saw. Those beavers were drowned, and they were back foot catches. So they had the full length of their body, and they were still drowned when I got there. So I don't think that it takes a whole lot of water to drown a beaver, but I can see where if you had to take otter into account, that depth is going to just get deeper and deeper. So going back to the weight situation, so now we've got a little bit of a gray area on how deep the water has to be, right? And then if you add weight into that, there's going to be a lot of gray area, because I know, on a mink set, you can take a 6-pound window weight, chuck it out into 2 foot of water, and the mink is no longer, right? Like, that's a perfect set for a mink. But by the same token, if you were to accidentally catch a beaver or an otter in that set, that weight's going to be up on the bank with the beaver or the otter waiting for you there when you get there, right? That's not sufficient to drown a beaver or an otter. So me, typically, I've never actually weighed one, but I'm guessing that, I just start filling rocks into the sack until it's heavy enough that I wouldn't want it tied to my foot in deep water, right? Basically. So I'm guessing that I'm around 25 pounds ish, and that's always been more than enough to drown. And actually, I rarely have one that's even moved at all when I get there. You know what I mean? They stay put 20, 25, 30 pounds for even a 40 or 50 pound beaver. They're not moving them very far because they're in the water. They can't push off the ground and drag. All they can do is swim, and you can only swim so hard. So it works pretty well for me. Now, so we've already got some gray area. If you add in weight instead of solidly anchored, then you add in some more gray area. So I can see why they wrote it the way they did, because they were trying to eliminate as much gray area as they could, but still give a little bit and give people a way to maybe get a drowning set in place that's going to meet their definition and get you that 48-hour check. Again, for me, where I trap, it's just not practical. I mean, there's very few places here that have a soft enough bottom that I could jam a rod in and have it be solidly anchored. And even getting a T-bar into the top side a lot of times is not possible. I end up wiring off to a root or a tree or something a lot of times. So, depending on your area, this could be very helpful, or it could really not mean much to you at all. Now, the other thing about this is I've had a lot of people, or seen a lot of comments, and people are kind of getting upset because they define drowning set, and that's not what they do, right? So, and this is not what I do, and you saw it on the videos, right? So the way that this is written, this is not the way I make a drowning set. However, there's nothing in here that says that you have to make a drowning set this way. So, that's important to remember too. You can make the drowning set the way you've always made it. You can use your window weights, you can use your brake drums, you can use your sack full of rocks, you can put it on a cable. You can do things the way that you've always done them. All this is saying is you have to check those every 24 hours. Those don't get that extra 24 hours to be on a 48-hour check, because it doesn't meet the criteria of a drowning set that bumps you up to that 48-hour check. So nothing in here says you can't use weights. Nothing in here says you can't do things the way you've been doing them for years. This just says that you still have to check them every 24 hours like you had to in the past. So really it's either no change, or if you can run sets like this, you get the benefit of the 48-hour check. But nothing in here says that this is the only drowning set that anybody can use, right? So I think there's some confusion on that too. So anyway, that's what this is. I encourage you to become a member of your state organization, because your state organization, again, is going to have a committee. They're going to get feedback from the members, and they are going to be able to propose changes to rules and regulations and limits and seasons and all those things. And right now, as an individual, you can write an email or make a phone call or write a letter to your Department of Conservation or your Fish and Wildlife, whatever your state calls it, which I have done. And you're going to get back an email that says, thanks for your input, we'll look into it. And where it goes from there, who knows, right? But when you get an organization that has hundreds or thousands of members, and they propose something, and the Department of Conservation or the Fish and Wildlife knows that, this is an organization dedicated to trapping or hunting or, whatever, hunting coons with dogs, or whatever the organization is, these people understand how this hobby is done, or how this pursuit of animal is done, and they have a big group of members, then I think it's a little bit more effective as far as getting them to actually consider the changes. So I think it's important to be a member. I think it's important to go to the meetings. I think it's important to let your voice be heard, and have that backing of that organization going to your Department of Conservation or your Fish and Wildlife, whatever you call it, to try to get some change actually to occur. So I think that's it.